So I want to talk a little bit about hand tools, just go over a few of the main ones that we're going to use fairly often when working inside the machine shop. So first off, I'm going to start talking with the file. So the file is used to file surfaces of your material. You can either file to make chamfers, round off edges, or simply to remove burrs along your workpiece. So the file has a whole bunch of teeth along its surface, and they're all pointed in the one direction. So it's important to only use the file towards the front. If you pull on the file instead of pushing, then you're going to end up dulling the teeth and ruining the tool over time. Not only are the teeth only pointed in one direction this way, but they're also angled off in this direction. So that's just an important note. Now, to use the file, all we have to do is simply put it against our surface and with a firm downwards pressure, slide it across the front. Like I said before, always in the forward direction, never in the backwards direction. Now the angle of this line that I mentioned earlier is important because depending on the angle at which I file the material, I'm going to be removing more or less material depending. So if I file perpendicular to the surface like so, or if I file a little bit off to an angle, I'm going to get different results, which helps when you're just trying to fine-tune the surface. So next we have what's called a deburring tool. The deburring tool works similarly to the file. We're going to use it to chamfer the edges of our workpiece and remove any sharp edges. The deburring tool has a spade on the front face here, and it pivots around the handle. What we want to do is simply put the spade against the surface of our material and pull it to the other edge. And this is going to chamfer the edge of our workpiece, removing any sharp edges along its surface. It's very difficult to get a nice and even chamfer along the whole length of a workpiece. Therefore, it's a little bit cruder than the file. But for quick deburring in between different processes, the deburring tool is always my go-to. Now, the deburring tool has different attachments that we can insert on the end of the deburring tool. One of those is very useful, and it's very similar to a countersink, and it's used to deburr holes that you've drilled into a workpiece. So here I have a workpiece with a hole on the front face. I'm going to use the deburring tool to deburr the edges of that hole, make it nice and smooth. The deburring tool to deburr holes is conical in shape and has two blades on either side. All we have to do is simply press it inside the hole and then spin the tool, and it'll chamfer the edge all around our hole. And it does a fairly decent job at getting it nice and even all across the surface. So next up we have what's called a scribe. The scribe is used to trace lines onto our workpieces. Let's say I need to bend this sheet metal piece and I want to have a nice even line in order to use over on the break. I'm going to use the scribe to trace that line. The reason I wouldn't use a pencil or a pen is pencils and pens tend to be erased on the sheet metal or any type of metal because of the oil on your fingers. So just by manipulating the piece, you're going to erase all the lines that you've worked really hard to trace onto your workpiece, and then halfway through your processes, you won't know where to do your certain operations. So the scribe, we simply use it like we would a pencil. We put it on the surface. You're going to want to apply a decent amount of down pressure onto your scribe in order to provide a nice scratch onto the surface and trace your line. Not only are the lines drawn by a scribe permanent, but they also leave a kind of indent inside the surface, which is fairly easy to find later on with different tools. So let's say on this sheet metal piece, I want to drill a hole around here. So I'm going to scribe my two lines that are intersecting. And then I'm going to want to use what's called a center punch in order to punch a dimple into the surface so I can follow up with a drill press and drill a hole at the proper location. So this is what's called an automatic center punch. It's a spring-loaded punch, so you don't need the hammer to follow up and give the blow. It's got a spring with a weight inside to do the hammering for you. So all you want to do is locate it along your two lines where you're intersecting, which I said before, using the scribe lines, it's very easy to find that location. Once I have it set up, I simply have to push down on the top of the center punch, and there'll be a nice satisfying click, and it'll leave a sharp dimple into my workpiece, which I can then follow up on the drill press and drill that hole. Now, another tool that we'll likely use often when working in the machine shop is what's called the combination square. The combination square is very simply a ruler with a guide attached to it. The guide can be slid along the ruler to get different dimensions. All we have to do is loosen this thumb screw on the front face. So if I loosen this thumb screw, I can then slide the ruler back and forth. Let's say I want to measure an inch into my workpiece, then I'll slide the ruler, or the guide, I should say, along the ruler to the 1 inch line. And then tighten my thumb screw in place. And now the guide is going to be nice and fixed. And I know that the edge of the ruler here is exactly 1 inch from the guide on my surface. Now the guide is super useful because we can use it to hold up against a surface of our workpiece. And we know that the edge of the ruler is going to be exactly 1 inch from this edge. And we can trace perpendicular lines simply by following the edge on the guide. Not only can we easily trace perpendicular lines, but if we flip our ruler around, we can use the 45-degree angle. So if we slide our ruler to the other side, then we can use the 45-degree angle on this surface and trace a nice 45-degree inside the ruler here. So I think that about covers the main hand tools. I would suggest getting familiar with the Imperial system if you're not already familiar. A lot of the hand tools and equipment in the machine shop is going to be of the Imperial variety, simply because it's still very popular in the industry, and the tools in Imperial are a lot easier to find than metric tools are. Yeah, and that's it.